Good afternoon / morning / evening / middle of the night. It's the internet. Time is not a thing, but thank you for joining us. If you're joining us live, this is Recruiting EQ, episode number 65. I forgot to say when I'm 64 last time and do a Beatles reference. I'll do it now. When I'm 65, my God, how are we here already? And today's title, Entrepreneurship from A to Z or Z, as we're in Canada, with Nick Rapley. Nick, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Just a quick disclaimer before we go around the room and get all this rolling. If you are viewing this live on LinkedIn, it's going out live right now on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on X, on YouTube, and if you are viewing this live, please do feel free to comment. We will take breaks to read comments that come in. We have great participation on these shows normally, so thank you very much for your participation. We are not on those apps, though, right? So you can't do sidebar conversations with us necessarily, so please do just bear that in mind. We are going to not name you in this interest of confidentiality as well, because you're probably supposed to be working right now, and we don't want to get you in trouble. So that is it. And if you are listening to this pre-recorded, feel free to check us out on anywhere you get your podcasts. Disclaimers done. Let's get rolling. How's everybody doing? Shall we go around the room and do some intros?
Yes, let's. Me first?
Go for it, Nick.
Very good. Okay, well, I'm very good. Thank you, Rick and Julie, for having me on. I'm Nick Rapley. I am 41 years old. I am a lifelong entrepreneur, which is probably why you guys have invited me on to the podcast.
It sure is.
Good. And
doesn't their age, by the way. I'm just wondering. I don't know that we need to do
you can
that.
lie, Julie, if you want. From the UK originally, hence the accent. Currently living in a very overcast, rainy Vermont, and always interested in projects and businesses and interesting people doing interesting things. Hence why I'm here today.
Awesome. Thanks, Nick. Julie, you want to take it?
Brilliant. Yeah. So I'm also seeing sort of like delay with syncing sound and the audio. I don't know if it's just my end because we just had this ridiculous thunderstorm, but just letting you know that that's what's going on at my end. But hopefully that's only me. So I'm Julie. I'm the one of the founders of Raymond George Consultancy. I've been here for probably 60 of the times that we've been here. Actually, no, that's a lie. But I'm not going to divulge my name, my age, but I'm considerably older than Mr. Rapley and Mr. Bugia.
Well, come on, we're all more or less in the same age. Thanks, Julie. I'm Rick. You guys may, if you're just joining this, I host this podcast every Wednesday at noon, which is Recruiting EQ, which incidentally abbreviates to REQ, like a requisition that recruiters do. And that was not an accident, but this came up in conversation the other day, and I don't really push on that too much because I didn't want people to think it was spelled WRECK, the Rec podcast. But Recruiting EQ /Rec. And myself, I thought I was going to be a serial entrepreneur guy. I dropped out of college to start a record label. I had a couple of music industry businesses. I had an app company that I started with friends of mine. And since none of them were successful, I don't usually tell people that, but it's true. So I'm interested to hear what you have to say as well, Nick. And currently I'm the SVP of Business Development at Raymond George Consultancy. And there you go. So shall we dive in? Oh yeah, and for those listening, like Julie's saying, in Toronto right now, or in Ontario, where Julie and I both are, it is like 37 degrees with the humidity. So there's bound to be some sort of crazy weather event that happens. So if this whole podcast just goes off the air, I apologize. There you go.
Yeah.
Nick, how are you doing? You're in Vermont? I thought you were on the West Coast. I guess I'm not up to date on where you are.
It's a very long story, Rick. Very long story.
Perfect.
The short version is moved to Boston in 2017 to launch our company's US business. Spent a bit of time in Boston, a few years in Boston, and then I'm not a skier, so the winters were very long and cold, and decided that I couldn't do a sixth winter, so picked the sunniest place in America, which I think is San Diego. And it just so happens that there was a real big presence for clients of ours out on the West Coast. So I swapped my snow boots for my surfboard, spent some time in San Diego, back to Europe. And then my wife fell pregnant. and she's from Albany. She's not too far up the road, an hour up the road. So we decided to have a little baby in America, hence why we're back in Vermont.
Nice. Congratulations.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You're in Bernie Sanders land.
Yes. Looking forward to bumping into Bernie somewhere.
Yeah, for sure. Or Larry David. How do you tell the difference? They're cousins, it turns out. That's awesome. Thank you for being here for this. I mean, the entrepreneurial thing has been a big topic of conversation that Julie and I have both found we run into a lot over the past few years in staffing and recruiting in general. But like everybody seems to want to either start a company or talk about people who are starting companies or buy a company or sell a company like it ain't no thing. This is just everyone talks about it. But few people, I think, have really gotten very far of the many who talk about it. And I think few people have been through this roller coaster since before and during COVID, which you have, Nick. So I think that there's a lot in just your story that I think people could perhaps benefit from, especially those who are just thinking about doing this now or diving into it now. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think that's kind of why we wanted to sort of hear a little bit about your journey in entrepreneurship. Maybe even starting with that awesome anecdote that you sent to us of when you were 12. That was pretty stellar. If you want to
sure, no problem. It's a really interesting question. And I think entrepreneurship is kind of trendy. It's kind of as trendy now as it's ever been.
Yeah.
And I think maybe we'll come on to this later. That's interesting to me because I don't see entrepreneurship as better than the corporate world, and being in a structured business and having clear promotion path to the next level. I think it's just different, and the career that a person builds is based on their own personality, and entrepreneurship is really good for some people and not good for others. So I don't like this concept of it's trendy and everyone wants to do it, because it just won't be good for everyone. But yeah, my journey was interesting. The question is always, does entrepreneurship find you, or are you kind of born that way? And ever since I can remember, I was solving problems or coming up with solutions or silly little business ideas. And I would say my first attempt at a real business was when I think it was 13, maybe 12. And my parents at the time had a fairly big collection of VHS videotapes, films, and we were hiring other films from this guy that would come around, and it was like a Del Boy type setup. He'd come around in his little three-wheeled car, and we'd hire VHS tapes out the back, and it was all a bit weird. And I thought, well, there must be everybody that was in the road that my parents lived in must have their own collection of VHS videotapes. And I thought, there must be some way in which I can catalog all of those and then act as a broker for neighbors sharing VHS tapes. And the idea was I was going to charge people a fee, an annual fee or a monthly fee to be part of the club. Everybody would get the list, and then I would do the swapping, and that was that. So that was the idea. First step was going to neighbors and trying to catalog what people had. And I think I got to about house number 5 or 6. And I remember chatting to the couple that lived in this house. And then I became really aware there were sirens turning up. So it's like something out of a film. So a 13-year-old boy stood at this house, 2 police cars scream up to this house, police get out, ask me what I'm up to. And 2 previous residents had reported me, thinking I was kind of casing the joint to burgle them. This little...
For tapes.
Yeah, exactly. So that put the end to that. Parents thought it was a great idea. I think even the policeman thought it was quite a good idea. But being a somewhat well-behaved 13-year-old, I thought, I'm not going to get involved in this. So that was the end of that business idea. And then shortly after, in my late teens, a friend and I decided we were going to drive to Portugal. We bought a minivan that we converted into a camper van before it was kind of trendy to do so. And we went to the European Championships, the European Football Championships in Lisbon. We didn't have any money because we were broke 19-year-olds, and we came up with this idea to buy in England flags from Thailand. I think we paid about 60 cents for a piece and sell them at the ground. So we bought them in for 60 cents. We sold them for €5 a go. And we had 500 flags that we sold out on. We wish we'd taken 5,000. And it was brilliant. I remember getting back to the van. England lost, so we were kind of miserable. But we had cash stuffed in pockets and underpants and under a hat and all sorts. It was ridiculous. And that cash funded our trip for the next 5 months. And it was really interesting. Dan, my best friend, and I spoke at length on that trip about running your own business and what could come from having something that was yours and being creative and operating outside the lines and all that good stuff. And we got back from that trip having had lots of time to soul search. And we then both went into business. He set up a business in the leisure industry that he still has now, 20 years on. And I got into recruitment, set up RBW, which is still going on now, 20 years on almost. And you're right, Rick, it's been an absolute roller coaster, good and bad.
I bet.
We set up in the financial crisis in 2007, which looking back, I think was the best thing we could have done. Very stressful at the time. And it's just been this crazy ride where I've learned so much about me, people, the world of business, what I think I want to get out of life, and no doubt has set me up for, I think, a really interesting next 20 years because of all that experience. And I put it down to the videotape experience and the trip to Portugal, like little building blocks that lead into something bigger and more interesting. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a flavour.
Just to interject there for a second, Rick, Nick. So please. I think also you have more business involvements, haven't you too? Because didn't you? I think at one point you told me that you own like a bicycle shop or something.
Yeah. Well, my wife is becoming increasingly tired with me having business ideas. I've got an ongoing list on my desktop.
That's funny.
And with this same chap that I toured Europe with, I'm a big cyclist. I love long distance cycling, and I'm a bit of a geek with the data. I love all the data and the power and all that good stuff. And we saw an opportunity in London. There was a real gap between classic spin, like a classic spin exercise class that you would go to, and you'd have an instructor in a leotard at the front, just like screaming at you to ride faster. And at the other end of the scale, there was bike clubs that were really nerdy bike geeks. And there was kind of nothing in between, the amateur cyclist in London that likes going out on club rides at the weekend. There was no data-driven but kind of fun club that you could join and have a workout. So we thought we'd set something up, which we did. And it was really cool. It was different. The feedback was amazing from the local community. We had VR races up some of the most iconic mountains in the world. So you'd sit on your bike. In front of your screen, you would have 8 other riders all riding up Alpe d'Huez. And then we what a word that is. We streamed it to the local pub across the road, and people's friends and family turned up. And once you'd finished your race, you could go and have a beer afterwards. So it was really cool. And we had people going out on club rides wearing our jersey, with UCC on it.
Yeah.
Which is just really cool. And people bought into the culture and the ethos and what we were trying to do, which I think is just so important when you build business generally, getting people bought into the mission and the vision. So that was really cool. Yeah, really good bit of fun.
Cool. I didn't know to that extent, actually. Thanks for explaining that.
Yeah. Can we go back to the VHS story for a second, which is that in the version of it that I heard, you also ended saying that your parents thought it was hilarious that the cops busted you for doing nothing wrong, essentially. I find that interesting because as a 12, 13-year-old, right, had that been your first foray, and had you gotten into real trouble, I wonder if you wouldn't have had the same positive association for starting a business. Like the fact that your parents were like, "Oh, the cops are here," is hilarious, is probably part of why it didn't turn you off, because that story could have even easily turned off a kid from being like, "Oh my God, this is this scary, terrible thing," and then you could have had a whole different life, maybe path potentially.
Could not agree more. Really interesting point. And there's more to that. I think it set me up in future to be a little bit more risky and aggressive. And I think I was, looking back, I think I was too quick to say, probably shouldn't be doing this if the police say no. But if I'd have explained it a bit more, maybe if I'd have brought my parents out and had them explain it, it could have actually then turned into something. I could have gone back to the neighbors and explained what was going on. So that taught me a lot. But yeah, the reinforcement of it was a great idea and it's a shame it didn't work out maybe next time, just gave me the kind of the impetus to go and do it again. So yeah, it's a great point, Rick.
I think that there's like I mentioned at the beginning somewhat humorously that I thought I was going to be an entrepreneur guy really by this age, and I am also older than you, Nick, but not by that much. But yeah, like I dropped out of school to start a record label, to my parents' massive chagrin, and I joke about it because I'm not still doing it now. I mean, it was 26 years ago, right? So it's like at the time though, we had 3 years run, we had 6 different bands released, we had people touring across the country, we had a couple of college radio hits, a couple of music videos, blah, blah, blah. So we took it far enough to actually, go somewhere. And then to realize, oh my God, this is a misery. I just want to make music. And this is, doing this is making me hate my life. But the learning experience of doing that instead of going to university, which is what I ended up choosing to do, I think drastically shaped who I am as a person. Instead of being a bit more rule followy, and had I listened to my parents and so on, I think I would have turned out a very different person. So I have no regrets about it, even though, the label part of it didn't really suit me in the end. I feel like the what you learn from walking away from some of these passion projects is often just as important as succeeding. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I agree. And I think actually walking into them as well teaches you so much. Again, walking into the unknown. We talked about this a bit before we came on, but yeah, that kind of gray area of go, no go. I'm putting myself in a position here where it might work and it might not. The police might turn up, the police might not turn up. Who knows? And yeah, you learn so much about yourself when you put yourself in those positions. And I didn't go to university. I chose to get into work, and that led to me traveling around Europe with my friend. It led to me selling flags at a football ground and talking to my friend about what's next. And it's all those little steps. And I'm not saying that's what you need to do to become an entrepreneur, but putting yourself in positions where you need to figure stuff out and have some fun while you're doing it really then leads to, I think, bigger and bigger and bigger things, to a point where you actually, I think, speaking to entrepreneurs, you really then seek the unknown. You really seek that learning, like putting yourself in positions where the police might turn up if you go and sell VHS. Like this is quite an interesting place to be from a learning perspective.
Well, yeah, and so to go back to the cycle shop, the cycle club idea for a second, that was something that you were really passionate about, and then you did as a thing that you'd be like, wouldn't it be cool if this would exist? And then, hey, let's make it exist, and then actually finding people who were bought into it and so on. But I get the impression from the way you talked about it that it didn't spectacularly work out, maybe financially, or something made you not continue doing that. Was that a learning as well, to be like, look, I'm passionate about this, and yes, we found our people, but it wasn't a great money-making venture? Or like, what was the sort of end result there in your mind of how that contributes to your story?
Yeah, it's good, really good question. So it was a real learning experience, and the learning experience there was the timing needs to be right for the people that are involved in it. So it's myself and another guy that set it up. I had just moved to Boston to set up RBW US, and I was splitting my time between the UK and the US at a time when I was incredibly busy running the recruitment company. Dan, my friend and partner, he had just found out that his second child was due. So he was incredibly busy running his own business and supporting the family. And we just didn't have enough time. We didn't have enough time to give it and make it what we wanted to make it And it made money. It was a successful business, but it was just incredibly stressful for both of us. Dan's second child then came along, and he had even less time. I was flying between the States and the UK, so I couldn't really give it the time I wanted. So it felt like it wasn't the right time to do it and grow it, and it was affecting our personal lives. So the big learn there was really think about whatever you're doing, the requirement that's going to come with launching a business or being involved in a business, because it can quite quickly go from, it's a great idea, we love it, to, oh my God, there's so much pressure to now make it work and give it time. And if you don't think about that, you find yourself in a position that's a tough one.
I think that also coincides with what you want from it, right? So you might have these ideas, but I think what you want from someone, we were talking about this as well earlier, is around what you think you might want from something going in changes often based on situations or circumstance or whatever. And I actually also realization about what you do or don't really want from something. Yeah, it's a real journey, and where you start isn't where you end up, I don't think, often.
Yeah, and you know, the cycle shop was a real passion project for me. It was never about making $1 billion and selling it and, you know, going to sit on a yacht forevermore. It was something that we just loved to do. I loved being in the studio. I loved talking to cyclists. I loved people being passionate about getting fit and racing. And you know, we were charging people £7-8 a session, $10 a session, and so it was never about the money. But you're right, Julie, sometimes it morphs into something that you don't expect. And again, when you get into business, having an open mind around what it can and can't be, I think is really crucial. And we've joked, Dan and I, you know, when we've got a bit more time, perhaps we'll do it again, and or in a different guise. And we've got a couple of other ideas that I think are quite interesting within fitness. So it was all around a great experience. But yeah, it was a real kind of passion project for a couple of years.
I'll take a beat for one comment, Julie, if you don't mind, which came in, and this is someone who clearly knows you, Nick. So I don't know if we should be naming her, which we don't usually do. But this is Michelle saying, Nick always taught me that it's fine to have 10 ideas, and if 9 of them fail, you learn from them, and one of them works, then that's success.
Yep. Still fully endorse that mindset. I think it's I think everyone should think that way, you know. And I think there's far too much critique in the 9 that don't work that make people nervous about continuing with that train of thought. If we actively encouraged all ideas at all times, even the bad ones, you know, we've had conversations in RBW where someone says something, you think, blimey, that just won't work, but it sparks another thought of something that is really interesting. And had that person not said that thing in the first place, the conversation would never have gone there. So yeah, particularly in Michelle's world, where you really have to be creative and new ideas are always well received, we've always encouraged that type of thought process. I think it's really important.
What was the, if I can interrupt here for a second or interject, what was the goal when you started RBW, Nick? What was the kernel that you're going to exploit? Yeah.
It's interesting because there wasn't one. There was no goal. The story goes, the 3 of us were out on a night out. We'd had a few too many beers, and the bar was terrible. There was no one in the bar, and we got chatting, and we still debate who was the person that said, should we just do this ourselves? But we got into that conversation, and it was so loose, the conversation, that we all turned up the next day to discuss it properly, and each person thought the other 2 were kind of setting them up. You know, there was some like big operation that the company was trying to. It was all very strange. But then we got into conversation around, actually, we think we can do this ourselves, and we think we can create a company that brings something different to the recruitment industry. So we just started. We thought, let's have a go at it. The risk is relatively low because we were still young and living at home. But we had no plan. There was no, we're going to do this for 10 years and sell. There was no, we're going to scale across a number of locations. There was no real plan around targeting specific industries. And we can get into this more if you guys want, but I think it really cost us. It cost us in speed of progress. It cost us in revenue generation. And I think had we been far better structured with a much better plan earlier, we would have been twice as successful in half the time. And I think we'd have all enjoyed it a lot more than we did. So there's huge learns there. But yeah, I remember the first time we were forced to think about a plan was about 6 or 7 years in. And we had a non-exec came in and he said, "What's the plan, guys?" And we said, "Well, you know, we just keep growing. We're doing well and everyone seems to buy into what we're doing and we keep adding heads and we're successful and we're good." And he was like, no. You need a plan. What do you each want to do personally with your lives? And how does that fit into the business? And I remember him saying to me, "Nick, what do you want to get out of life?" And we got into, well, I want to live in the mountains. I want to be near water. I want to have an active lifestyle, blah, blah, blah. And we each started creating this concept of what RBW could do for us personally and how it could change our lives in a really positive way. And since then, or from then, we started to cultivate plans and really identify what we were each really good at within the team, and then apply each of us to that, all in pursuit of moving the business forward and us each getting closer to our own personal goals. So it was a real kind of watershed moment, and I can remember the meeting really clearly.
That's very honest of you to say that you didn't really have a plan for 6 or 7 years. That's like, yeah, good for you. Like, wing it. Just wing it.
Yeah. It really was. We were in our early 20s. We were all really ambitious, hardworking, driven people, and we knew we wanted to grow something really interesting and different. And we think we did that, but there wasn't the real long range stuff, like where you're going to be in 10 years, how you're going to get there, what are the, SWOT analysis, what are the opportunities and threats, all that good stuff. We didn't really touch upon. And we kind of figured stuff out as we went, a lot of trial and error. But it was only really when we started engaging non-execs and people that had walked the path before that we really started to understand there's a more professional way of doing this. And that changed how we operated forevermore.
Sorry, Rick, I was going to ask, so those sort of first 5 or 6 years, did you get the success and the growth that you did through hard work? I mean, would you say that was it? Or was it just, was the economy was in a good spot, so it was maybe a little bit of luck in terms of timing? What contributed, would you have said, to that? I mean, getting to that point? Because if you'd have started that during COVID, I mean, in the sector that you're in, it may have actually worked even better. But if you'd start sort of today, as an example, then it may have had an entirely different effect. Yeah. What do you think about
that? I think we started in 2007 when the pharma industry wasn't too badly hit, but it wasn't a good time to start a recruitment company. People weren't spending money. Yes, we worked incredibly hard. We worked incredibly long hours. I always have done, but more so then. I was thinking about the company all the time. We were working weekends. But interestingly, I think not having a plan allowed us to be really fresh and interesting in the industry. And I think people really bought into our we'll just figure it out as we go approach. I'm not saying that's the right approach. I think there's a blend. I think you need a plan, but I think not being too rigid and doing interesting things along the way really engages people. I think people really buy into this feeling of I'm at an interesting company doing interesting things. The guys running it are a little bit odd and come up with some strange ideas every now and then. It's not a typical recruitment company, and I think that's cool, and I think that's interesting. So we were good at what we did. We worked incredibly hard, and I think we were just fresh. I think we were different and interesting. I think people bought into that. Michelle might tell you otherwise. She writes a message on the board.
Yeah, we'll wait for that, and we'll give her screen time when that comes in. Do you feel like starting? Let's say somebody wants to start an agency now, or they've started a recruiting agency now. Do you feel like it's drastically different? Do you feel like things are essentially the same at the core in recruitment, or what do you think has? I mean, obviously, there's the obvious things that have changed, I suppose, out there. But how does that strike you, the time difference?
Yeah, I think, yes, obviously it's different. When we started, you're still calling through a phone book. We'd call it yellow pages in the UK. You just, you're flicking through a physical book and you're calling managers. Obviously, those days are long gone. But I think the core principles remain in that you need to create a company that's interesting. And I think now, probably more than ever, when there's so much shared online and easy to find out about businesses, I think you want to create something that is just different and can build trust quickly and gives people the opportunity to feel connected to a mission. So anybody that's starting a recruitment company these days that wants to scale something, I think you need to take the core principles of what makes a recruitment company good, but be different and interesting in whatever way that is, because that's the differentiator, and I think that's what people buy into. Even clients. Just quick last comment on that. I think clients want, in recruitment generally, clients want you to deliver. They want you to be good, and they have a pain point and they want you to fix the pain. In my experience, though, they're the big stale companies that have been around for 100 years that are heavyweight and lethargic, often don't get as good a response as a nimble and fresh and interesting business that are ready to prove themselves. And I think clients, again, in my experience, really buy into that. They really buy into that. The new challenger on the block. So if you're starting, don't worry about that. I would kind of embrace it.
Yeah, bigger isn't always better. The connotations with bigger is different things, which might be great for some, but not necessarily all.
Agreed. Yeah. Agreed.
What was the which marker of time would you say that did you achieve success, whatever success looks like to you?
Yeah, good question. The $1 million question.
Or not? Are you there? Did you get there?
Well, I don't. This is a bit of a dodging the question answer. I think the definition has changed through the years.
Right.
Yeah.
So right at the start, it was just do a deal, and then we did a deal. I'm like, oh blimey, success! Woohoo! We're away. We're off to the races.
Yeah.
And then it was hiring staff, and then it was getting an office, and then it was building teams, and then it was multiple offices. So there's lots of little markers along the way. And we can get really philosophical about this, but I wrote a little article many years ago on success, and I think I now define it just as being at your core happy and content with where you're at in business, in life, etc., etc. And as an entrepreneur, it's quite difficult to have that in business because you're always looking for the next thing and improvement and refining. But there have definitely been moments where I've been out with members of our team over the years and had a real sense of success, happiness, that everybody is doing well. And we've created a business where people enjoy coming to work. And those little moments are probably the moments that I would say I felt like I've achieved success, if you want, in inverted commas. Bit of a dodge to your answer, Julie, but hopefully that makes sense.
Well, yeah, no, I actually don't disagree at all. I think that that's a very good answer. In terms of sort of tangibles, though, so you went from 3 people to at the peak of, let's call it, headcount or geographies covered or whatever sort of tangible. What were those markers for you?
I think we had, so I think at our peak we were at 80 headcount across a number of offices worldwide.
Yeah.
And yeah, you're always looking for that. I think with recruitment companies, there are definite phases that you go through. So there's startup, founders, if it's just the founders, and all you're thinking about doing is doing deals. Put money on the board to pay for, get yourself into an office and maybe make your first hire. And then going from founders and a couple of extra people to 10 is quite a big step. You're then battling with, are the founders still on the phones? Are they still doing recruitment? Or are you now managing people?
Yep.
Are you managing business? Do you hire people in to manage the business? So there's all those questions. Then going from 10 headcount to 25 headcount is the next big leap. And all the challenges that come with that, creating teams. You've now got to build managers to look after teams and hires. You've then got to put processes in place. How do you recruit? Where do you recruit? HR processes, et cetera, et cetera. And then 25 to 50 plus is the next big leap, multiple offices, much more of a complex hierarchy. And then 50 to 100 is the next one. And then once you get over 100, you then get into kind of big corporate recruitment structures. So there are milestones along the way that you definitely feel like you're achieving. But as a business owner, I'm sure anyone listening to this will say, I just want to know where I'm going to be in the next 6 months. I'm happy where we are, but where are we going to be in 6 months? Where are we going to be in 12 months?
Yeah.
I think that's kind of built in. That's part of being a business owner.
But if it's, maybe it's not a clear answer here, but which stage or which cycle during this has been most difficult?
Well, my late 20s, so we would have been 7, 8 years in. I think the going from a small 10 headcount company to 25, 30, 35 was our most challenging time, and me personally. And as an entrepreneur, you're then getting into territory of real organizational design and process,
yeah,
which wasn't back then naturally my style. I was always looking for, the next new exciting thing that I could build or create. And luckily, one of the other partners, he was very blue, we would call it. We did a personality profile and he was the organizational guy. So we learned that he should be looking at that and I should be, doing other things. So, but that leap was difficult. You felt like you'd kind of got somewhere. You had a business that was running and making money and you were growing, but you didn't really know what to do next other than keep adding heads.
Yeah.
So that was a challenge. It felt like a lot of the time we were kind of running on a treadmill. There was lots of effort and lots of blood, sweat and tears, but sometimes just felt like we weren't actually moving anywhere. And that was actually the time where we started engaging coaches and people that were experienced to try and guide us. So that's probably the most stressful, I'd say, or difficult.
Go on.
No, I was just gonna. So I have 2 questions for you, Nick, which is based on stuff that you just said. There was an interesting thing that you pointed out earlier about like having a plan meant trying to figure out what do you want out of life, not just having a plan for like how to make the next $1 million, but what do you as a person want out of life, and then how do you tie that into the business growth? To what extent do you think that is a luxury? Like you need to get to a certain point of just, okay, I'm just going to work long hours and work hard at this thing, but then I get to a point where I'm like, now what do I really want out of life to curb it? Or is it like a chicken egg thing where you're like, well, if I don't know what I want out of life, then it's all for naught, and I need to know that first before I get in. And second part of the question, I guess, just tying into, you mentioned about being fresh, different, and what have you. How much of the difference in RBW do you feel was you or the partners, like who you were as people versus things you were doing that were different in the company? And how related is all that stuff, do you think, the personal versus the actual procedural of the business?
Yeah, they're definitely linked for sure. And there's a famous phrase, the founder trap. You know, people, your listeners, your viewers can look it up. Julie, I'm sure will know about this. And it's essentially, if you want to build a business and scale a business that you exit from, whether that's operational or, you know, full exit, there is a stage at which the business needs to be able to operate without the founders.
Yeah.
And the founder trap is that you can't remove yourself.
Yeah.
So to answer your questions, I'll answer part B first. I think initially, yes, it was all about us because we had nothing. And I mean literally nothing. So we would interview people with no boardroom table. It was very weird, but we would sit 3 guys on 3 chairs, and then the interviewee sat across the room from us, like 10 feet, with no table, because we had nothing. We had no office. It was very strange. And we still joke now. We say we just don't know why people joined. Like, it was such a risk, and it was such a weird proposition. But I think it was because we just had belief in what we were trying to do. And I think people bought into that. They bought into us. The challenge then was to bring people in that viewed life in a similar way and were interested in being part of something that was different and fresh, like we talked about, and then getting those guys, empowering those guys to then bring their own personalities to the team. So to kind of dilute us as the original founders. But it was a real challenge. It was a real challenge, particularly when you interview somebody and you're the one that's doing the interviewing, and, you know, they buy into you and your ethos and your vision. To then remove yourself from that is quite difficult. To answer the first part of your question, I think it is a bit chicken and egg. I would now advise people that you definitely should be thinking about what you want to get out of life, and whether the business that you're considering setting up is in tune with that. If they are opposing each other, then one thing won't work. Either the business won't work, or you'll be unhappy because you haven't got the life that you want. So I think it's important to really give that consideration. And I think when you're in your early 20s, me speaking personally, I didn't really know what I wanted, so it was cool. I could just set up a company and figure it out as I went. Now it's very different. And now I'm really considering my wife and my child and my lifestyle. And do I want to live in the woods? Do I want to live in the desert? You know, if I live in the desert, I'm probably not going to be able to set up a garden center or a nursery. I don't know what you guys call it in Canada, where you grow green plants.
Yeah.
So there are things that you need to really consider before you commit. And I think if you get it right, I think if they do align, it can then be a really, really powerful feeling that you're doing something that you're passionate about, and it is getting you closer to your personal goal, whatever that is.
Yeah, that's awesome.
What do you think, Rick?
What do I think? Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think that's the whole challenge, right? Is I think that especially if you're going to be entrepreneurial, it's in a way the highest form of sales, in a way, is you're selling yourself. You're selling an idea to people that doesn't exist. So you're like in the prophetic phase where you're like, trust me, this is going to be great. There's zero evidence. So like it's the ultimate version of that. So it's almost a lunatic thing to do, that you have to just have this wild faith in yourself, in your idea, and so on. But there's something super moving about that. But again, I think if anybody's going to do that, I think that there's a misnomer out there right now that a lot of people are like, if I just make the company efficient enough, efficiency, you know? And I'm like, okay, what about we talk about effectiveness instead? Like, what's effective? Because effectiveness would mean long-term too, right? This has got to be sustainable. And maybe it's because I am in my mid-40s now too, and I've had my share of idealism and failure and whatever to that's made me grow a little bit and not just dive into the first thing right away.
Yep.
But I agree with you. You know, even like starting a record label, dropping out of school to start a record label, I did that because I was a musician, songwriter, producer, and I thought I would just put out my own songs and the songs of people who I thought were good, right? But you just can't do everything yourself. It just doesn't make any sense. I mean, talk about founder trap. It's like, no. We'll write the songs. I'll record all of them. I'll play most of the instruments. We'll buy the gear. We'll produce the records. We'll pick the artwork. We'll negotiate prices for the t-shirts and the blah, blah, blah. And then to get it out to radio stations and Duke and Stein, it's impossible, right? So you just burn out. 3 years we lasted, and I burnt out twice. I was almost hospitalized once, again, just because of not sleeping and travel. Like, I almost killed myself, literally, in trying to do it, and still stubbornly was like, we're going to make it. You know what I mean? And so, yeah, I think that it is important to know what you want out of life and what your limitations are. And sometimes you have to stupidly put yourself in the hospital almost to figure that out.
Well, you joke about that, but that for me is the crucial part, and probably part of the answer, is when it's really bad and tough, and you're going home at the end of the day thinking, I just can't do this anymore. Like, it's so stressful. And I'll ask you for your thoughts in a minute, Julie, but those feelings of like, we've had a really bad week, we've had a really bad month, we've had a really bad quarter, I can't see any light at the end of the tunnel. If there is no purpose there, like personal why am I doing this? If you don't have that, it's really hard then to motivate yourself to go back the next day and do it all again. But if you have a really clear vision of, this is what the company is doing for me and my family, and that can be anything. It can be money, it can be freedom, it can be travel. It then makes those bad times far more tolerable. And actually, I think you can view those bad times in a much more constructive way if you know it's all building towards something. If you're not, it's like being on the treadmill and having no end. The screen doesn't work and you don't know when the treadmill is going to turn off. No one likes that. So you need to be able to see what's coming, and you need to know that in 40 minutes the treadmill is going to stop and I'm going to have had my workout and it's all great. That's really important. That's why it's so important in my view.
Julie, what do you think?
Yeah. I think, what do I think? I think it's, I think for a long time, actually, I didn't really, similar but dissimilar to you, Nick, I think that my vision was not clear for a number of years, actually, and it was treadmill. And if it had been a different time during the treadmill, maybe I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing. But fortunately, it was a easier time during the treadmill moment, shall we say? And that's probably part of the reason why I'm still doing what I'm doing. But I think for me, during this whole journey, it's become clearer what it is that I want and why I do what I do, and that is personal. And I know that, in my heart, I know that I can achieve that through doing this. So it's become more granular and simple, right? It doesn't have to be big, explosive, crazy. I'm a bit of bright and shiny, I think, a little bit like you. So bright and shiny is very easy for me to go after, like, oh yeah, that looks exciting. Let's do some of that, shall we? And I've learned that about myself, which I probably should have known earlier. But but it doesn't have to be that, or just putting it in a pocket of, that's okay, that you know that about yourself. But you might chase it anyway, but it's okay. But it doesn't have to be that you have to chase the bright and shiny, just because you don't need it necessarily. So status quo, or just sort of leveraging what you currently have and what you've sat on to get what you need, or to what actually sort of at the core drives you, is okay. It's totally okay. So I think sort of realization, acceptance of perhaps where you started isn't where you're going to end up, or where you think you're going to end up, and being completely fine with that, for me, is I don't even know what the question was now, but I think that's where I've got to, right? I'm okay with that. I don't have to be, I don't know, like somebody that is And at one point I thought, is that sort of like defeatist? Is that like a defeatist attitude? Like it's okay not to be where I thought I could be. And I'm okay with the fact that no, it's not. It's not a defeatist. So you have to almost like reason with yourself. It's not defeatist. It's like I am at the point of accepting and realizing what I want to do with this, and I'm perfectly fine with it because it gives me what I need.
Yeah.
It was a very long-winded question, a very long-winded answer there, which was quite ambiguous without giving you any sort of particular tangibles. But that's sort of where I'm at in my head.
Can I just jump in there, Rick, quickly?
Absolutely, please.
I was thinking about the podcast last night, and I was wondering what you guys might ask me. And I was kind of reflecting on the entrepreneurial, what is it to be an entrepreneur? And I genuinely think it can be anything. You can be Elon Musk and you can be wanting to colonize Mars, or you can be somebody who wants to set up a shop selling sweets. And I think there is so much to be said for people that are willing to take the risk and the leap. And everybody just has a different idea of what they want to get out of it. Yeah. And I think that's cool. And, Musk, the richest man on the planet, in my view, is equal to the person that wants to set up their sweet shop. Everybody's doing it for different reasons, and everybody has different amounts of success. And so much of it is about timing and what industry you're in at a particular point in history. Yep. But we all have that shared common trait of wanting to do something for ourselves. But yeah, your own personal why is really important.
Well, yeah, and this actually ties in rather well at this point to last week's episode as well, which we were talking about. So one of the things we do on this podcast is we monthly have a success and wellness panel, and the topic of last success and wellness panel was impact, because that word comes up a lot in speaking to people and asking them what they want out of a career, out of life, that they feel is missing. And it's very common for me to hear from recruiters or people who work in BD, or even people who work managing teams of recruiters in agency and in-house, but especially in agency. The word impact comes up a lot. I want to have more impact. And the question was always around, like, what does that mean? Is it just a buzzword? Are people articulating correctly? What does that mean to different people? But certainly when you look at the factors that contribute to depression, burnout, etc., lack of feeling that there's impact in your day-to-day work, that it doesn't really have a result that you get to see or feel that's tangible, is one of the main contributing factors in burnout and in depression. Is the feeling like there's no purpose behind what you do every single day. And certainly from an entrepreneurship standpoint, I mean, I can't think of any job or whatever where there's more impact. It's all you, right? And it's all risk too, so it's a gradient scale. But talk about payoff in money, sure, but payoff in having an impact on every decision you make, I mean, it doesn't get more impactful than entrepreneurship, I would figure.
Yeah, agreed. And actually, going back to one of your previous questions, when did you feel successful? The original purpose for us was just to make a company that worked. And I didn't want to go back to mum and dad and say, here's another one that I didn't quite manage to pull off after the VHS experience.
The police have arrested me. Yeah,
exactly. So that was my driver. That was my purpose. But then you get to the point where it is working, and then you think, what's next? What impact am I having? What is the purpose? And then you, like I said, you start involving non-execs and talking about all that good stuff. But I think our impact, our purpose was twofold. One, bringing people into the business and giving those guys purpose. I loved that. I loved bringing people in. Use Michelle again because I know she's watching. Creating something within RBW that was going to be impactful to the business, that she would be an integral part in. And then she took it on and she ran it herself. Was really meaningful to me. That was my purpose. And then recruiting into an industry that's doing meaningful work within the pharmaceutical world was obviously also purposeful. So that helped again in the times where it was tough, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like personally, I feel like I didn't expect to love recruitment. I started in my early 30s, right? It found me, and I didn't expect to love rec to rec also. But it dawned on me at some point that rec to rec is recruiting your peers. It's the only time that you recruit and consult your own peers. And there's something about not talking about filling jobs for a certain industry, but talking to people about recruitment itself, hiring itself. What's happening? What are the challenges? Between AI taking jobs away and many people hitting retirement age. What do we do about succession planning and Gen Z people not wanting to enter the traditional job market? What does that mean? These conversations I find keep me going. It's all purpose 100% of the time for me, because these are big questions, and it's nice to have a forum to actually work a job where they actually pay you money to talk to people about this or do podcasts about it or whatever, which is amazing, right? And it's funny because I've come right around from being a very dour and depressing Montreal, which I am, and a lot of the French people that I know from Montreal, super negative about the job market. Super negative. They don't think you can be happy working a job. It's like they say about Torontonians, they say it's live to work instead of work to live. And then it's like, oh, it's this painful thing we have to go through, and then let's work as little as possible and then just party all the time, right? And I think that's really negative and sad in a way. I've come right round to feeling like, no, you can be happy with what you're doing. And I feel like, like you said before, Nick, finding out what's going to make you happy in life and letting that sort of guide you. Julie, you say this often when people are talking about success or whatever. But to what extent do you think that that's kind of a universal thing that people should start to sort of check in at a compass at a young age? Or is it that you should go make mistakes first and figure it out? Or how do you guys feel about that quotient of deciding your path in your career or entrepreneurship or not?
That's a big question, Rick. It's a big question.
We need the biggest questions for like 4 minutes left.
Yeah, we need another couple of hours. In short, for me, I think people should go out and make mistakes. I think you will figure it out when you figure it out. I think if you have the luxury of doing something that you're incredibly passionate about, you should pursue that. Like you, Rick, mine was people. I love people. I love humans. They're weird and interesting and never predictable. And I just love immersing myself in worlds where humans exist. But yeah, in entrepreneurship, go out, make mistakes. And if you're going to do something and you're going to take on risk, it's much better to do something that you feel really purposeful about and that there's clear meaning involved.
Yeah, I agree. Or you love something that you love, and they're saying that you never work a day in your life, or whatever. When you don't work a day in your life when you love what you do, or you love whatever that expression is, which I've just completely bungled. But it's you don't work a day in your life when you love what you do, or something. Anyway, I won't try it again. But I completely agree. And I do feel that it's like coming to work for me, and oftentimes during my work life, I've been challenged around how much time I spend at work. And it's because I love what I do. And actually, it doesn't feel like work. It doesn't feel like I want to do it because I love doing what I'm doing. So I think if you can couple the two, you generally have a successful outcome. And I actually think it's sad for someone not to love what they do. I think that's awful to actually have to like dread going to work. It's like, to me, it's like, go find something else. Go do something else that you at least like, just to make yourself overall happier and the people around you happier. Awful situation to be in. So loving what you do is the key. And if you haven't found it, you need to look for it.
And that ties into something you said earlier, Nick, actually, which I don't know if we were talking about this before we went live, and I don't know how hard we hit this, but I thought it was super useful and somewhat poetic as well, which is about being comfortable feeling lost.
Yeah.
I believe there was an article you got about that. If you can elaborate on that a bit as our closing end thought.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, it was something that I came across in my late 20s, and I was speaking to a business psychologist, and I was explaining that people were saying to me, I'm running from something, I'm moving to different cities. I want to go and move abroad. I'm always doing the next new hobby. And they were viewing that negatively. And I didn't view it negatively. And they said, this person, there's something great in being lost. and you are seeking the feeling of being lost because you have to figure things out, and there's opportunity that comes from being lost. And it was the first time in my life where I really thought, actually, yeah, that's what I want. I want to create something from scratch. I want to be in a place where I don't know anyone and I've got to go and build relationships. And they sent me an article that was written by a famous psychologist on being lost and people who seek the feeling of being lost as being a really positive thing. And it changed my life forever. Like, really, really did. And I think I joked before we started, it applies to getting out in the car and getting lost. You now don't, because you've got Google Maps.
Yeah.
And that sense of having to figure stuff out and adventure, I think, is now not as prevalent as it used to be.
Totally fair. And a great point as well. So there you have it. Get lost, throw away your smartphone, and then start a business. That's it. Well, thank you so much, Nick. I mean, that's our time. Lovely to have you here. I feel like we could do 6 more of these. So please come back again if ever you can and are interested in doing so. Thanks for joining us, everybody who's joining us live. If you missed this live and you're watching this pre-recorded, feel free to also get it anywhere you get your podcasts, be it Spotify or Apple. In fact, if there is a place you get your podcasts and you cannot find Recruiting EQ, hit me up with a message and I'll make sure you can. Thanks, everyone, and have a great rest of Wednesday.
Thanks, Nick.
Thanks, guys.